plucking strings. As every thread of a gold is valuable, so is every moment of time. John Mason. Chapter 3. A gentle tug here and there. Wataru was a fairly plain man by his own standards, a bartender by trade due to a leg injury forcing him to resign his post as a chunin. He had done nothing especially exciting in his life, having been too young to have had any meaningful part in the Third Shinobi War and never going on any unique or life-changing missions. However, that didn't mean he wasn't content with his life. He was able to ease the problems of a weary ninja. Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for the support on the last part. If you want me to finish this series, make sure to like the video, comment key or anything else you might have to say. And let's get back into the video. Listen to their stories and sometimes even pick up a bit of interesting information. That was why when another brown-haired, dull-eyed chunin that he didn't recognize walked into a bar and took a seat on one of the counter's empty stools, he gave the man a friendly wave and a saucer of sake. "You look tired, kid. Rough mission?" The chunin accepted the drink, picking it up and staring at it for a moment before tipping it down his throat in one go. Immediately, the poor teen's eyes went wide as he began coughing into his hand, making Wataru smile and pat the kid on the back. "Oh there, kid, take it slow. It's like you've never had a sip of sake before." The brown-haired teen smiled back weakly, wheezing a little as the burning in his throat subsided. "Yeah, that helped a little." Wataru grinned and took to collecting a few of the empty bottles scattered over the counter. "I bet it did. Why don't you talk about it?" The chunin looked down at the now empty saucer before shrugging half-heartedly. "Sure, why not? You know that Kakashi guy?" The bartender gave a quick nod. He had heard enough stories from and about the man to have a clear enough picture of what he was like. "I just came off a mission with him." Wataru gave a quick barking laugh as he began to wipe down the counter. It was getting late, and soon a lot of the older chunin and jonin would be stopping in for the late night rush. I bet that was rough. I heard he was a real tough one. Yet at times, he manages to be as lazy as his dogs that he summons." The young chunin gave a small chuckle as he put a bit of money down on the bar. Wataru responded by sliding him a full bottle of sake. "Yeah, I guess that summed it up pretty well. It was a pretty routine mission, but just having a jonin there really cranked it up a notch." Wataru nodded again, making long motions with the cloth over the counter until it gleamed back at him. "I bet it did. Those guys can be pretty intense." The chunin took another sip, a smaller one this time, and only shuddered a little at the burn. "Tell me about it," he muttered. Then again, those habits of his sure are something. Wataru smiled down at the counter, seeing his face reflected back at him from the freshly polished gleam before turning a grin on his lone customer. "Ah, I guess you mean him being late all the time. Man, if I haven't heard more shinobis grumbling about his tardiness than I have complaints about that guy fella. You know, one time, I heard he was almost 4 hours late, to a jonin meeting of all things." The chunin laughed, looking a little rosy around the cheeks as he took another sip from his saucer. "No kidding. He was about an hour late just to turn up to the mission." Both men shared a chuckle at that before Wataru leaned over the bar a little. "You know, I gotta ask. I hear all these crazy rumors about the guy having a Sharingan under the headband of his." The chunin's eyes widened ever so slightly. "What do you know about that?" The teen blinked before smiling sheepishly, taking another sip of the sake. "Sorry, I couldn't tell you. He had that thing down for the whole mission. All my squad mates were wondering what he had under there." Wataru sighed as he leaned back, slightly disappointed. "Ah, well, I guess I'll find out eventually. Bag of mysterious Kakashi, that fella." The chunin just nodded before inclining his head and pushing back off the stool. "Well, anyways, thanks for the drinks." He walked out quickly, leaving Wataru to continue wiping down the bar. "Anytime, kid." "Oh, I never did catch your..." The chunin was already gone. A few moments later, Another patron that had been sitting in a corner booth put down some money and wandered out. Wataru thought that was a weird one, wearing his hood up all the time and only ordering a glass of water. Then again, he used to be a chunin, so he knew ninja were all sorts of crazy. Outside, the hooded figure walked down a few streets, subtly tailing the mousy-haired teen before watching the same brown-haired chunin walk down a nearby alley. He quickly hurried after him, only to find the brown-haired teen waiting there for him. There was a moment of silence before the figure pulled down their hood, revealing a head of spiky blonde hair. Naruto had let his hair grow out a lot since he had started the academy. The result was longer, thinner spikes that might have given him an almost Bishonen appearance when combined with his lithe frame and almost constantly narrowed eyes. "You continue to amaze me with your acting skills, Dami." A chakra thread attached to his hand twitched and suddenly the tuning burst into smoke, revealing nothing more than a man-sized puppet. Naruto had long ago refined Dami into what stood before him, shaving him back, smoothing out his body, articulating more joints and adding many compartments for general storage. The puppet lacked any defining features like a face and had lost many of its combat capabilities with the change, but Naruto used him more for information gathering. Or perhaps it's a people's stupidity that amazes me. Naruto shrugged, unfurling a scroll from one of his money pockets before using it to quickly seal his puppet away. Taking out a notebook, he quickly jotted down what he had learned the night from the few other places he had visited. It was a good thing he had decided to use puppets instead of going in himself, or he would have been quite drunk at this point. Cross-referencing what he had learned with the information he already had, he grinned in satisfaction. "Seems the introduction was unnecessary, Sensei. I think I know everything I need to." Absently, he swung a small bell out of his pocket and listened to it tinkle gently. "More importantly, I know the trick behind this test of yours." There was no way he was being sent back to the academy. The next day, when 3 genin arrived at their predetermined time, only 2 of them were hungry from missing breakfast. All 3 looked tired from early hour, but then Naruto always looked tired, so he didn't really count. Sakura and Sasuke were slightly surprised when Naruto casually walked up to the meeting point on a small red bridge carrying a small stack of books. When he sat down on one of the wooden railings and began reading through the first at surprising pace, it took Sakura almost 2 minutes before she finally commented. "Hope you guys didn't hear the notification. Let me mute that." Okay. "Naruto, what are you doing?" The blonde didn't even look up from his book. An interesting, if not rather stylish account of the Sanin's battle against Hanzo of the Salamander. "Passing the time until Sensei arrives. I hate not making the most of my time." Sakura raised her eyebrow at the blonde and looked down at the small stack of books. It would take her a good few hours to go through them back to back. Sasuke looked over from where he was leaning against the railing, mildly interested in hearing the blonde say more than he had in the past few months. "How long do you expect to wait?" Naruto simply smirked beneath his hood, letting out a small breath of a laugh but didn't give an answer, making Sasuke's eye twitch in annoyance. Before he could comment, both his and Sakura's stomachs let out simultaneous growls, causing him to grumble and her to go bright pink from embarrassment. "You two should get something to eat while you can." Both of his teammates looked at the young puppeteer oddly, but it was Sakura who spoke. "But Sensei told us not to do that." Again, Naruto never looked up from his book. In fact, at that moment he quite calmly licked his thumb and used it to turn the page. "Sensei advises not to eat. There's a difference. Unless you think you'll be sick from a mere test." Seeing Sasuke rise to the bait, Naruto hid his smirk as the Uchiha pushed off the railing. "Unless you have food in those bottomless pockets of yours, I don't think we'll have time to just walk off and get breakfast." Naruto shrugged non-committedly, flipping the page again. Sakura was actually a bit surprised by the rate he was reading. He often read books in class, which for some reason the instructor ignored, but never at this pace. It seems he was at least keeping an ear on the lesson. "You might be surprised, but I figured you'd say as much." Still reading, he quietly withdrew 2 wrapped sandwiches from his jackets and threw them at his teammates. Sakura fumbled with hers a moment before looking at it, her stomach rumbling its own 2 cents. But Sensei said. She was surprised as Naruto suddenly cut her off by raising his hand, flapping them like a mouth. But Sensei said. Both she and Sasuke blinked at the perfectly impersonation of Sakura's voice, down to the slight whine and pitch. Sasuke's eyes narrowed at that, wondering at this new piece of information about the blonde enigma. I didn't know you could impersonate people's voices. He waited for Naruto's reply, only to turn as a voice suddenly sounded from behind him. Oh, I don't know, Sasuke. There might be a lot you don't know about Naruto. Sasuke swilled at the sound of Kakashi's voice, only to see thin air behind him. It made him frown and look about for a bit before seeing Naruto smirk. What are you looking for, Sasuke? This time Kakashi's voice came from Naruto and Sasuke knew he had been fooled. So, you can throw your voices. Naruto shrugged. Stop pestering Naruto, Sasuke. Wait. Stop pestering Naruto, Sasuke. Sasuke blanched as he turned to Sakura, only to see the girl looking at Naruto in surprise, her face bright red. Stop impersonating me, Naruto. Naruto snickered into his book. It was surprisingly fun messing with his teammates. Eventually though, they all settled down a bit. Sakura and Sasuke ate their sandwiches, while Naruto read, and over the next 2 hours they amused themselves as best as they could. Occasionally Naruto would mess with them a bit with his ventriloquism, all the while reading book after book until he was almost finished with his last one. Why, hello my cute little graduates. Kakashi was a little surprised when he appeared on the bridge and greeted the teens, only for none of them to react. Sakura was lazily leaning over the railing and watching the fish swim down the river. We're not falling for it again, Naruto, she muttered tiredly, looked up to berate him, only for her eyes to go wide as saucers as she spotted their sensei. For real this time. Oh, Sensei! Suddenly she remembered how long she had been waiting. You're late! Over on the other side of the bridge, Naruto snapped his book closed with mild irritation. He had only a few more pages. Couldn't Kakashi have been a little later? Morning, Sensei. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at the nonchalant greeting, but didn't read too much into it. When he looked at Sasuke, the boy was just grunted and pushed off the railing. Yes, well, I think it's time to get started on your test. With that, he pulled out 2 belts from a pouch on his hip, slightly suspicious of the sudden smirk gracing Naruto's features. So, you all understand? Seeing the 3 quick nods from his getting, Kakashi smiled, quickly tying the 2 belts to his waist where they jingled. Good, then you have until midday. He produced the small stop clock and set it on a nearby tree stump. Great, then let's begin. Instantly, Sakura and Sasuke vanished into the bushes, leaving Naruto and Kakashi alone in the middle of the training ground. The older Jonin smirked his head at the blonde with a bemused gleam in his eyes. You know, you weren't exactly winning any points for stealth. His eye was momentarily drawn to where he thought he saw a tiny streak of blue light, but ignored it for the moment as Naruto spoke. I don't need to hide. I already have a bell. Kakashi's eyes widened as he looked down at his side, only to narrow it in confusion. Both wells were still there. When he turned, he saw Naruto holding up an identical bell he had produced from his jacket, causing the silver-haired man's brow to quirk. Are you in the habit of carrying around bells with you everywhere you go? It's not very stealthy for a ninja. Naruto shrugged, and Kakashi quickly saw that conversation wouldn't be going anywhere. Well, that isn't the point of the exercise, I'm afraid. No matter how unorthodox a solution it might be, you have to get one of the 2 bells at my side. Naruto frowned as he casually threw the bell onto the ground with a small sigh. I figured it wouldn't be so easy. Just as Kakashi was about to move in and engage the boy in a bit of taijutsu, for motivation of course, his body went up in a cloud of smoke, that was telltale of the substitution to Kakashi's trained eye. It was fairly inefficient given the large cloud of white smoke it produced. Soon enough, it was apparent that it was deliberate, as when the smoke cleared, all Kakashi saw was a hole in the ground, roughly as wide as a man, and the tip of something long and slender disappearing within. Okay, buddy. Seeing that put the masked Jonin on guard. It made him think that perhaps he should have given the academy reports a bit more attention. For a few minutes that felt much longer than they were, Kakashi stayed in the same position, slightly confused by his students' lack of aggressive action. All the while he kept an eye on the ground, oh my god, I can't talk. Very wary for whatever had burrowed underneath the soil after the substitution. Perhaps a summon. No, Kakashi quickly shook his head at that. It was absurd to think that a fresh Genin not only had a summoning contract, but could actually produce something larger than a small dog. For a moment he was tempted to lift his headband. It would be easy enough to see what was hiding beneath him then. He couldn't. That would be acknowledging an academy student to be at the level even some Jonin hadn't pushed him to. His lone eye widened slightly as he noticed his own shadow becoming just slightly larger. Looking up in time to catch the glint of a kunai, just shrouded by the light of the midday sun. He caught the extended arm easily enough and brought his knee up to counter the follow by a kick, throwing his attacker over his shoulder only to be surprised to see Sasuke crouched in a 3-point stance. You shouldn't be so focused on me, sensei. Kakashi's ears twitched, forcing him to turn and see a small hail of glinting shuriken barreling towards him. He caught one of them with ease and used it to bat away the others, only to wince as the muscles in his hand suddenly locked up. In his haste and complacency, he had missed the slight purplish hue of poison lacing the shuriken. At least they had the intent to kill down. He turned as Sasuke went on the offensive again, using the slight advantage of Kakashi's temporarily paralyzed hand to almost scrape the bell in a brief exchange of fists. Shanaro. What he definitely wasn't expecting was, as he locked in a brief bout with Sasuke, for Sakura to suddenly appear from the tree behind him, preparing the two combatants with as accurate kunai throws as she was able to. It was painfully obvious that she had only ever practiced against stationary targets, as all it took was maneuvering Sasuke between him and the pinkett to get the Uchiha to break off the attack or risk being perforated. It was almost a shame that the two displayed such a good attempt at teamwork. Now if only Naruto would. As the dark-haired boy jumped back, Kakashi only caught his smirk at the last moment before his lone eye widened at the small detail he was forgetting. Something burst right from the earth behind him, and as Kakashi turned to what he expected would be Naruto, his shock only grew. What had appeared could certainly not be considered human, even if its top half was undeniably female. More alarmingly though, the thing just seemed to open up all of a sudden, releasing veritable hail of kunai in a wide arc, mostly focused on Kakashi. In his shock at the thing's sudden appearance and, well, its appearance, Kakashi could only do his best to weave between the obviously poisoned ones. To his shock, he heard the telltale sound of a steel slicing through a cord. Sure enough, from the corner of his eyes, he spotted two shiny bells flying away from him. As he tried to reach for them, something long and thick whipped out at him, forcing him to bring up the guard. As he was as he was thrown across the clearing with surprising force a Genin shouldn't be able to master on their own. He was able to see the bells land somewhere around where the Genin had started the exam. Looks like we win, sensei. As Kakashi landed in a 3-point crouch in the middle of the field, Naruto took that as his cue to drop down from a nearby tree he had been hiding in. He joined Sasuke and Sakura as they walked over to where the bells had fallen, making Kakashi give the three Genin an eye smile. Oh really? But what are you guys going to do now? After all, there are only 2 bells. Naruto simply gave the man what could almost be considered a genuinely confused... There are only... Wait, why did he say 3? There are only 3 bells, but there aren't. There's 2, but okay, whatever. There are only 3 bells. Naruto simply gave the man what could almost be considered a genuinely confused expression as he crouched down and picked up the bells. All 3 of them. What are you talking about, Sensei? That's enough here for all 3 of us. To demonstrate, he tossed one to Sasuke before doing the same for Sakura. All that Kakashi blinked before remembering the bell Naruto had so casually tossed away at the start of the exam. Sure, it was planned. Sure, Kakashi could tell the blonde out on it and say only 2 of them could pass, but then he'd just be forcing the pretense of the test and not acknowledging its subtext. Not to mention, the bells were all generically identical, so there was no way to be certain which were his 2. Well, what can I say, you 3? He let out a small sigh before giving them all one of his best eye smiles, which were pretty much identical to all his other eye smiles. There was only so much emotion you could convey with only a quarter of your face revealed. You pass. At that, both Naruto and Sasuke let out a satisfied smirk, and Sakura did a small dance of excitement. It warmed Kakashi's heart to see how happily it all made them. Quickly enough, he turned his attention back onto the thing, now slithering over to Naruto's side. Not that he had a better look at it, and wasn't trying to defend himself against a swarm of poisoned weapons. Kakashi realized quickly enough that it was a puppet. It was a little disturbing though, with the upper torso of a woman, hair down up in a long dreads, and the lower half of a giant snake. It almost reminded him of something he might see in the training ground 44. Its eyes were so completely whited out, giving it a cold, emotionless look. Its mouth revealed a set of long, sharp teeth that gave it a vicious smile when Naruto was so inclined to make it do so. Funny enough, a puppeteer was one of the few ninja professions Kakashi could never claim to have fought against. That would have been his father. Naruto, just what is this thing? Now that their excitement had worn off, both Sasuke and Sakura were looking at the puppet warily as well. Naruto, on the other hand, was smiling at it, patting the mostly wooden construct on the back fondly. You like her? I call her Ramiya. Kakashi just chuckled nervously at the boy. Who was he to belittle his hobbies? He really regretted not reading those academy reports now. Well, okay then. As of today, we're Team Kakashi. Man, that felt strange to say. I guess we'll meet back here tomorrow morning at the same time for training and missions. He didn't miss the excited gleam entering all his students' eyes at the mention of missions. The reality, he figured, would be quite the surprise. Johnny. With that, he gave a friendly wave before vanishing in a puff of smoke. However, not before he gave a little though to their performance today. A little what? I don't know. It was a rather remarkable display of teamwork for a new team. Maybe he had finally struck lucky. Naruto sighed as he appeared in the tree line after his successful substitution. He had no idea how fast the Jonin would be, so he wouldn't know if he would get away in time, but he had. A satisfied smirk lit up his face before he made a note of the position he had thrown the bell down, making sure he had it firmly in his memory. Why, he darted off from the tree branch, all the while manipulating Ramiya into place so that she would be ready to pounce at the right time. He'd likely waste all of the kunai he had stored in her body, but well, Kakashi had told them to aim to kill. It didn't take him all that long to find Sasuke, although the boy seemed slightly startled by his sudden appearance. It was remarkable how few people thought to look up when they in turn were looking down on someone. What do you want, Naruto? The blonde just grinned as he hopped down on the branch with the Uchiha, keeping a wary eye on Kakashi from the vantage point. It It obviously hadn't been long enough for the man to try something to lure them out. Good. I'm here with a proposition. Sasuke's eyebrow rose in intrigue, but he said nothing. Let me guess your plan. You were going to wait until either me or Sakura attack Kakashi, then use the opening to try and make a dash at the bells, right? Sasuke's face gave nothing away, but he didn't deny it either, making Naruto smirk. How about instead you and Sakura create the distraction? Your taijutsu should be much better for keeping Kakashi busy while Sakura lowers his guard. I'll be there to swipe the bells when he least expects it. And boy would the Jonin not expect them. And then what? Naruto shrugged casually. You and I split the bells, of course. We can both see that Sakura is the weak link here, and would only hold us back. Sasuke snorted quietly, not wanting to give away their position. Says the dead last. Naruto gave the Uchiha a deadpan stare for a moment. Please, Sasuke. We both know I'm as much a dead last as Shikamaru is. Sasuke's brow quirked at the comparison, but after a moment of consideration, he finally nodded. Fine, I'll go along with it for now. If you fail, I'll always have an opportunity to go for the bells myself. Never let it be said Sasuke couldn't acquiesce to a better plan with humility. Naruto just patted him on the back with a bright smile. That's the spirit. And with that, he vanished into the surrounding forestry again, leaving Sasuke alone to come up with a way of getting the drop on his vastly superior opponent. Sakura nervously bit her thumb as she lay down under a bush, hoping that one of her teammates would attack their sensei soon. The thought of going up against a Jonin was daunting, even if she believed Sasuke would find some way of getting the bells. As she racked her brain for some way to be of assistance, Naruto appeared behind her, unable to resist the opportunity to scare his teammate. Hey Sakura. The girl would have let out a shriek of surprise if in the same moment Naruto had uncovered her mouth. Quite, remember? We're trying not to alert Sensei to our position. After she had given a disgruntled nod to show she understood, Naruto released her. What are you doing here, Naruto? Naruto internally sighed at what he was about to do before allowing a small frown to play over his features. I came to tell you that I understand. Sakura blinked at that, not quite understanding what the blonde meant herself. I get that at the end of this, only two of us will become a team, and he bit his lip, looking away for a moment. And I don't want to get between you two. Sakura blinked owlishly at the suddenly bashful boy in front of her. Had Naruto always been like this beneath that hood? What do you mean? Naruto smiled sincerely, or at least it looked like that anyway. I don't want to get between you and Sasuke. I'd feel terrible if I ended up on a team with him, knowing that you were left behind, unable to pursue your love. Not to mention... Oh, this is dirty, dang. Not to mention things would only be awkward if it was us two on a team alone. A little pink entered Sakura's cheeks at the suggestion. With his hood down and his messy hair falling about his head like that, Naruto almost looked cute. So, what? Her voice was slightly meeker than she would have liked it to be, and with a start she realized she could hear the blood pumping in her ears. Naruto just gave another small smile as he began to walk away. I already talked to Sasuke about it, and we came up with a plan. At the end, you two will get the bells, he chuckled sheepishly as he began to walk away deeper into the forest. All you would need to do is provide a bit of support with kunai or shuriken when you see Sasuke fight Kakashi. He ran a hand through his hair almost bashfully, making the long spikes sway. I guess another year of the academy wouldn't be too bad. With that, he took off, leaving a startled and red-faced Sakura behind. Her eyes widened. A few moments later, and he appeared on a branch that gave him a good overview of the training ground. Still quietly chuckling under his breath, his teammates were going to be so annoyed when they realized he had played them. Maybe they'd be okay after they pass. Still, their reactions would be priceless. Naruto almost felt like skipping home. The feeling of perfectly executing a plan like that was indescribable. He had Ramia safely sealed away in her large scroll, about the size of his forearm, which was concealed in a pocket on the back of his vest, hidden in turn by his jacket. He had always had reservations about using scrolls to carry his puppets, as if the scroll got damaged, anything within became irretrievable. But there were no better options, so Naruto was sworn to learn a bit of the art, if for nothing else, so that he wouldn't have to carry around great big puppets that more often than not were larger than he was. Ramia, for instance, was generally about 7 feet tall when reared up, but she was almost 20 feet in length from head to tail, easily enough to constrict a man, or hide multitude of weapons. She was currently Naruto's favorite puppet and likely the one he would be using in combat for the foreseeable future, until a better idea came around. Dami was certainly useful for what it was, a glorified mannequin, but he held no real combat abilities anymore. Ramia, on the other hand, was built purely for that purpose, with every aspect created so she would be as efficient a fighter as possible. But then Naruto conformed to an ideal of change. If a better idea came along, or he thought of a more efficient system, there were always opportunities to change things. He found himself humming a nonsensical tune as he walked into his apartment, taking a moment to breathe in the heady aroma of brewing poisons, fresh wood, and various animal scents. With an uncharacteristic smile, he gently tapped the glass of a small habitat box he had built, watching as what at first appeared to be a long, thick stick slowly woke up and reared its head, revealing a long grass snake. "Afternoon, Hisu. Feeling hungry?" The snake lazily raised its head at the blonde, flickering its tongue for a few moments before laying back down to sleep. "I guess not." Naruto shrugged as he went about unsealing Ramia. He didn't like to keep his puppets in their scrolls for very long. Hisu, as uninspired as his name was, actually served as the partial inspiration for Ramia. That and controlling a puppet's legs were surprisingly hard. However, his first few attempts at creating a human-sized snake puppet had been painfully ineffective. The skeleton of a normal snake just wasn't designed for the load the larger size presented. He still remembered how he had gone about fixing that. A younger Naruto, only 7 years old, walked into the Dangoya cautiously. He had been going around the village asking a few chunin and jonin where he might find a giant snake. It would be great if he could find something that already existed in nature to base his puppet off. For whatever reason, everybody had pointed him to this place with a nervous expression. As skeptical as he was that a simple dango hut would hold the answers he was looking for, he had no better leads. Unfortunately for him, the place was almost barren, considering the lunch rush was over almost an hour ago. The only people there were the owner and a purple-haired Konoichi. Sighing, Naruto just decided to get this over with. "Hey." Anka looked up from her food and sake, quirking an eyebrow at the runt of a kid looking back at her. Surprisingly, it was actually at her and not her mesh-covered chest. "What do you want, Gaki?" Naruto looked about with a small sigh. "I asked a few people and they said this was the place to go if I wanted to find a giant snake." Anka's brow shot up in amusement as her eyes twinkled in time with a sadistic grin on her lips. "Oh really? And what would a little runt like you be looking for such a dangerous creature for?" Naruto's eyes narrowed at the patronizing tone. "What does it matter to you? You exhibitionist?" Anka's eyes twitched and a large tick mark appeared over her eye. At least the kid had guts. Her grin took on a sadistic edge. "Well, you came to the right place. You want to know where to find a giant snake?" She fumbled about in her pocket for a moment. and Naruto wondered how she kept anything with such skimpy clothing. Finally though, she emerged with a pen and paper and began jotting a rough, hasty map that was barely legible. "Here, go to this training ground. You'll find all the giant animals your heart could want." Naruto looked at the childish map disbelievingly for a few moments before shrugging and grabbing it, much to Anko's joy. Almost an hour later, the woman emerged from the Dangoya, still snacking on her favorite treat with a satisfied smile. Briefly, her lips corked down, feeling a bit of worry for the young kid she had sent into a very dangerous place purely out of irritation. Just as she was resolving to go find him, or what was left of him, she heard a ruckus down the street. A few civilians were whispering to themselves, and with a start, Anko quickly realized why. The kid was back, only he wasn't alone anymore. Somehow he was dragging a snake, longer than twice Anko's height, down the street by the tail. He looked to be struggling with it, but just about managing. There were a few rips in his clothes, but that didn't seem to dissuade from the excited grin on his lips. As he passed by, he looked up at Anko and gave her a quick salute. "Thanks, lady. That place is great." And without another word, Naruto kept on dragging the snake back to his apartment. Anko's jaw wasn't working for the moment, and she was snapped out of it only when one of the dumplings on her skewer slid off and bounced on the ground. Naruto had meant what he said. Training Ground 44 had turned out to not only be a massive boon to his puppeteering, with all the giant examples of animals it held, but also managed to launch his training in poisons forward by leaps and bounds. In gratitude to the exhibitionist woman who pointed him in the right direction, he had created Ramia, with the top half of a woman and the bottom half of a snake. Heck, if people were more focused on his puppet's top half than what was firing out his lore, then all the better. He'd have to find and thank that crazy dongle lady one day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like the video and comment Q for the next part.